at least 1 kilo occurred when my wife moved the scales to a different position on the floor.
Calibration incident.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't feel war. I just own halfway to Siwa.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words.
Roger.
Andy, how you doing?
Yes, it's the, by the time this is released, we'll know the outcome of The Voice.
Yeah, that's right. We will have been to the polls.
Yes. So we won't dwell on that too much today, I don't think. But I guess we should flag for those eager listeners picking this up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. This is not your Australia Decides recap.
Have you voted already?
No. I'm doing the. I think I mentioned before. I'm doing the sausage sizzle shop sort of thing at my son's school. So I'll kind of live and breathe the experience through that, and then vote while I'm before or after my shift, I guess.
Kangaroo sausage, I hope.
No, probably the tofu sausages in my area.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, isn't your area one of the least multicultural in the whole of Sydney?
Oh, I think it's probably more the vegan influences.
Coincidentally, right next to one of the most heavily indigenously populated areas, but that's another story. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and everything that we've kind of predicted has started to come to light. Yeah, I think I don't know. How's your fatigue level on it all? You just can't wait for it to be over, or you still have something left in the tank for it?
I haven't really engaged, other than with you. I haven't really engaged in like the debate around it with anyone other than you on the podcast. Like, I haven't had laborious sort of in-depth conversations at home or with friends or with colleagues or whatever. It's just been, just maybe it's been an intellectual curiosity more than anything else. But so, yeah, I probably haven't had, I don't view it through the same lens as, how I think others are getting a bit over it. But it just hasn't featured in my daily life, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Well, you sent me that thing the other day about the parody they did on when Kamal joined the project, which is a kind of a daily news editorial that we have here in Australia. And I've got to say that really hit the spot for me in terms of like the circus that has formed around this issue. It was right out. It had all the elements of a masterpiece of entertainment. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, we won't try to recap it because it just won't do it justice. But it's a classic thing of thinking someone's going to be an ally, and then an on-air oh shit moment. It's gonna be good.
So the other thing that's happened in the past few days is the emergence of very significant conflict in the Middle East.
It's something that has traditionally really challenged me because it's such a complex area. It's very, very hard to be an expert, and it's one of those conflicts that have been going back for decades and decades, right? And it has such a history, like any blood feud of you don't even know at the end of the day who threw the last stone. So I wonder if you can kind of give me your take on, what has occurred in the last week and kind of what your initial reactions were.
Okay, giving me all the tough questions. We're not going to have anything really insightful or meaningful to say in terms of the history of the conflict or who's right and who's wrong and all that sort of stuff. I think we'll leave that to others who have more expertise in this area. But yeah, obviously the kinds of stories we heard were quite horrific. I don't think we'll necessarily unpack all of what happened, but it's pretty hard not to empathize with the affected people. And some of the stories were like there were civilians and children and so on. But I guess this came to a fore in Sydney earlier in the week when the government here decided it would, in solidarity, as we have a sort of history of showing our support for countries where they experience, tough times. And for example, when the Ukraine war broke out, the Opera House was not painted, but had yellow and blue lights for the for the Ukrainian flag, and so the thing was, in solidarity, would do the same thing with the Israel flag, except that this is such a politically charged issue that, notwithstanding that this was an attack on Israel and civilians in Israel, innocent people really, and that this particular incident was the mood was right to convey that mood of empathy towards Israel and the Israeli people. But then how do you get past an issue that has so much, it's baggage, to be honest, because there's very deep-rooted views, very strongly held views in relation to the years and years of conflict between Israel and Palestine. How do you support Israel and the people of Israel following something like this without that message of support being interpreted as a slight on Palestinian people who also have their grievances, also have their positions that, it's not a black and white issue. This is not something where, if you look at the history, it's not a black and white, this is the right side, this is the wrong side. And so how can you in this moment navigate that challenging, and we're trying to do it now even here today as we're talking, or as I'm talking on my monologue, how do we show support for the people of Israel, because they're like, hang on, this is like an oppressor for us, or that's how they perceive Israel, right? So anyway, it's really, really tricky. What's your thoughts on the protest itself?
My initial thoughts were, it's kind of, are you protesting the insensitivity of the issue of lighting up the Opera House, or is the message a lot more nuanced than that, right? Is it to try to kind of bring awareness, how much of it is support of the actions of what has happened as well, in terms of getting a certain reaction and outcome? And I think that's a really tricky part, right? It was those things are wildly different in terms of what the public can stomach, given these acts of aggression. And what, let's be honest, it has been classified very much as a terrorism incident, right? A terror attack on civilian populations. So it triggered those emotions in me. Now, I absolutely recognize that this is a quite literal house of cards in terms of understanding it, of aggressions on each side, and it isn't clear who's to, there's not a clear answer here that everyone can align on. And also, I do believe in the right to protest. I'm not one of those people who actually thinks that is, that has gone the wrong way in the West. I think that's their right, and they're free to exercise that, right? So I've got no problem with that, right, in terms of peaceful protest. I don't know where they keep on getting their flares from, because they always seem to have flares, and I need to find out where to get one of those.
So, of course, now the question is, should they be approved to protest again? And this is one of these weird sort of things where, at least in Sydney, the expectation is that you have police approval to kind of ensure that a protest is organised and managed and so on. So the one from the other day wasn't pre-approved or anything like that, but it went ahead anyway, and the police managed it or whatever, of course. But we should acknowledge that it became a big controversial thing here in Australia because they were chanting some anti-Semitic slogans, and there were flares, and also go and watch the news yourself, I guess, to we won't repeat any of the things that were said. And of course, in response to that, there was quite a lot of community sort of reaction to some of the scenes from the protests. And in some ways now I sense there's probably a little bit of, these things are always every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so now the request to have another protest on Sunday has been denied by the police. And so now we're in this kind of really challenging zone where you can't just wish away that there's a group of people with something that they want to protest. You can disagree with them, but you can't wish away their desire to protest. And this notion that they're not going to be allowed to. What do you think about that? And is that something that, what's the best way to play this in terms of de-escalating and keeping everything under control?
I think it's a terrible move, purely because if you think of the true heart of the protester is they long for this. They're not looking for a Eventbrite QR code ticket to the to the protests. You know, it's meant to be speaking truth to power. It's meant to be kind of have a rebellious nature to it. And I think the more appropriate way to deal with it is much like how they deal with smoke. It's just like put some duct tape on the road and like, you need to stand in this square if you want to smoke, and just like take all the sexiness out of it. Take all the, like, do your best to manage it like a bureaucrat, and just kind of, you know.
Well, they did that with the Mardi Gras, right? The Mardi Gras started off as a protest movement for LGBTI, whatever other letters, rights, and
just say plus.
Yeah, plus rights. And it didn't take very long for it to be you get your ticket to the SCG for a government-sponsored parade.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, you know, for me, that makes more sense, right? That they would just tightly manage it because, like you said, the first protest was not approved or anything, right? So what makes them think that saying, oh, well, no, you can't do it again now, we're not going to approve that, it's really going to change anything?
Well, it also makes it, I mean, I trust the police to manage operationally like they're the experts, but at the same time, like my instincts are that surely it's better to have something to go ahead in a way that you have control over it. And I think just speaking,
I'd rather kids do drugs in the house than drugs outside.
I mean, just speaking to the, you know, some of the ugly scenes that we're seeing with it, I think that the protests started off with a more kind of nuanced message, right? That, hey, don't forget about us. Just because this thing happened doesn't mean that that we're just going to, you know, not speak to the grievances or whatever. But then you got to a stage where you had certain elements come into it and maybe hijack that nuanced message to create essentially a message that was the opposite of nuanced, right? And I just want to like tell my story about my experience with the protests. So it wasn't my experience; it's actually my son's experience. So on Monday, I think it was Monday, so my son went with my wife into the city for dinner. So I was at work, so I wasn't there. But so this is around the time of the protests. And so they went into the city and got dinner and saw all these protesters, right? And anyway, it was this thing that my son was really interested in. And he was asking me questions, like after, like when he come home, what was that about? Like what, you know, so I had to actually explain to him the Israel-Palestine conflict following this protest, because he just wanted to understand the issue, right? And so I thought, oh God, how am I, like, I can't even get my own head around it. How am I going to explain it to a 10-year-old?
Get the finger puppets out.
Well, I did one step better than that. I consulted Chat GPT, and Chat GPT gave me, I think, a very illustrative story that I think we could all do well to listen to and internalize. And I'm going to read it for you because I think it's actually a good way of distilling this conflict.
Are we sure we know the copyright on this particular issue?
All right. So the question that I asked of ChatGPT, and this is GPT-4 in case you're wondering, explain the general conflict between Israel and Palestine in words for an 11-year-old from Australia. And this is what ChatGPT had to say. All right, imagine two kids. Let's call them Izzy and Paddy. Both of them have a favourite toy they've played with for a long time. One day, they start arguing because both of them say the toy belongs to them. Over time, their friends and families get involved, and the argument grows bigger. Sometimes they try to share, sometimes they fight, and sometimes others come in to help them find a solution. It's a really old and complicated disagreement, and both Izzy and Paddy have deep feelings about the toy. The situation between Israel and Palestine is a bit like this, but with land instead of a toy, and it involves history, religion, and politics.
Wow. So did you read it word for word?
I did, but then he followed up with the question, so which side are we rooting for?
That's that sport match mentality.
Yeah, I had to say, look, it's not a sporting match, right? But no, it was it was just he took he really did sort of take interest in it. It was just a little bit hard to just kind of say.
Because I was going to say, all right, listening to that story, I think it was actually great, but I was like, I feel maybe I've got a misguided view of what like an 11-year-old is ready for, because to me that sounds very like condescending for a level. Like there's more, you know, that maybe if you replace toy with like a tactical drone or something, you know, something cool.
Imagine
once you
you're
use
playing
the computer.
Fortnite and
Just to be absolutely fair on the police and the situation of everything, and my comments before about being a supporter of peaceful protests. Let's just say they cancelled Kanye West's ass pretty quickly, and he didn't go anywhere near the level of like anti-Semitic slogans that they were shouting, you know, at these things, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, you're pretty insensitive lighting up the Opera House with Israel, knowing what the tension is. It's like a portion of them. And again, protests are wide and they can attract little subgroups or whatever. I have no idea, but documented with video saying some pretty like explicitly racist things, right? Anti-Semitic things. So I just want to I don't want to characterize this as like a peaceful protest, just like a vanilla kind of in that way, right? Because I think that changes things for most people.
especially following what's happened, right? A lot of people who live in Sydney who are of Jewish heritage, or you know, either might have family in Israel. This is cutting home in a very personal way. This isn't just about geopolitics, right? This is actually about, are your friends and family going to be safe? And in showing, and this isn't over, this thing, right? Something is going to come next. So maybe to turn our minds to that. Okay, like maybe talk us through what are the options? Like, what are the next steps from here, right? So the starting point is Israel has essentially pushed back, or you know, all of the people who came in. Essentially, what was a suicide mission. Really, they were, the Israeli forces came in and secured the areas that were infiltrated. But we're in this kind of zone now where, yes, but Israel's declared war, and they've even instilled a wartime cabinet with the opposition leader now within cabinet. So they're on a war footing. So it's hard to contemplate this as that it's finished. So, you know, I think when you mention it's like a terrorist attack, we can normally think of that as, okay, it happens and then that's it. But now we're kind of in this situation where it's actually the response and the next step from Israel, like the ball's sort of in Israel's court in some respects, notwithstanding there's still rockets flying over and all this sort of stuff. But what are the options and like, where can you see this headed?
I mean, there are always options, but I think given the rhetoric and the fact that you said Israel are at war, have declared war, I personally feel that what's to come is going to be a really big show of force. And I think the mentality that they would have, and is provoked by this feeling of this shock in the same way 9/11 shocked America into thinking, you know, we're not safe anymore. And we have to do something about that. And a huge pressure on the government to make right what they see as an incredible dropping of the ball, an oversight for a country like Israel that's really famous or prides itself on its intelligence capabilities, right? In fact, to the point that they sell their intelligence tools to most of the region with notable systems. I think that they will be of the mindset of, we need to actually totally destroy Hamas down to the last member. And I just think that they'll be forced to react that way by the situation. And the horrible thing that will entail is just huge civilian casualties, right? And it's not really an issue for me of whether Israel will be able to win a war against Palestine, right? That is not the issue for most people. They're a huge force with funding and capability. That's not what is at stake here. It's all the other friends, as you said in your toy example, right? Otherwise, it's really a David and Goliath kind of battle we're talking about here. It's really what it means to, on a global scale, of all the different allies coming into play. But I do think the response will involve, an all-out to try to minimize the threat, right? And as long as there are still members of Hamas working in cells, they're not safe. So they will take an approach of, we're going to go in hard through all the means that we have to neutralize this threat. What I don't know is, like you said, what the friends will do.
No one really knows what the strategic calculus was, but one of the theories that I read was that the rationale for such an attack is actually to draw Israel in to overshoot its response, right? To respond in a way that will draw in these other countries, because the view being that, Israel has been courting a lot of constructive partners in the region over the last little while, and it does not serve Palestine, or, it doesn't serve Hamas, for example, to have a powerful Israel that's supported by that's where the status quo is broadly supported. So
it takes you into the realm of conspiracy theories very quickly, doesn't it? All this kind of...
Well, no, this is. I don't think so. I think this is often what this is strategy. This is war strategy. This isn't like, I don't think this is conspiracy theory. I think this is, you have to think, how is it going to play out, and what do they stand to benefit from it? So, and if you have a revolution mindset where, the only way for you to achieve your objectives is to draw in others into a broader conflict. It's like playing poker, and you've got the worst hand. You've got the worst possible hand you could have, so you bluff, right? That's all you've got, right? That's the only toolkit you've got, and you're quite happy to reshuffle the cards and blow the deck up, and that's kind of what they're doing. So I don't think that's like a conspiracy theory. I think that's the calculus, right? And it does speak to like, what is Israel's best move? And I actually want to turn to like a related aspect of it, which is, let's leave the latest incident or terrorist attack, whatever we're going to call it, to one side, because I think that adds a layer that makes it a little bit more complicated to talk about. But let's just talk about, in general terms, right, Israel's approach, right? Israel has a very strong military. They've set up air defense systems. They
Iron Dome.
Absolutely have a firm response. If you attack Israel, you can guarantee a retaliation. Like, that's like, it's embedded into the system, and everyone knows that, and that's the rules of the game. And Israel, for that, given its stern approach, has been criticized. Like, many in the past have, Israel is not the most popular country on the planet, right? Like, that's not an unsurprising thing to say, right? And many would criticize its approach to these things, right? So I guess then in that context, I just want to talk about what is it to live in a country where you don't feel secure or safe, right? And the people of Israel want that from their government, because their safety, their security is the thing they want their government to deliver. And I don't think people in a country like Australia, where we are just so safe, and we would never have encountered anything like what the people of Israel encountered in terms of rockets and things like that, or the threat of their neighboring countries invading or whatever. We've never had anything like that. And I don't think we can quite understand or put ourselves in the minds of regular Israeli people who don't feel safe. And that if we were in their shoes and we had the capabilities and resources, we would want our government to act in exactly the same way. So, yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think to your point, it is very hard to put yourself in that mindset, right? Because one of the things that goes along with that is, once you feel safe, you stop thinking about it, right? You stop thinking about your safety. And that is the greatest gift of all, right? To actually live your life in the safety of your own home, your own country. So I think it's impossible, but in terms of empathizing or trying to put yourself into that position, I think that in terms of the hierarchy of what you find important in your day-to-day life, I think it probably does go through a cyclical nature, and it ebbs and flows in my mind that probably corresponds to significant attacks like this, right? And the reason I say this is that it's just that one of my core tenets is a belief on how adaptable humans are. And, when you have things like the Iron Dome in Israel that is literally, like a walled city that has air defense systems and continual scanning of the skies. And, you can see it in operation now, how incredible the fireworks are. as disrespectful it is calling them that no matter how crazy that is, that you're living inside a walled city in some ways, you just get used to it, right? That becomes your new level of normal as just a human being trying to get through with your life, right? You still have bills to pay, you got to do your job, you got to look after kids. So I think that in some ways their baseline is just different, but I'm not sure how much it affects them until these big events happen, and then they put lots of pressure on the government of the day to make the necessary adaptations. Now, that's not to say that that anxiety and that kind of threat makes them a very different beast. But I just do think that you get used to your walls being a meter higher every year without much that you consciously need to do. Right, so that's kind of my view on it.
I think where you have a government that wants to respond to these sort of really basic needs, that it, like now, especially now, just so fresh, and the wounds are like still, so fresh that it's we're not going to see good policy or very thoughtful policy. And I think when you have a community that expects a certain kind of response, and that might very well be the right response, it might very well be the just response or whatever, but like it's not necessarily going to be the best response. And I think that this is where like miscalculations can happen, where you have governments that might overreact or might react in a knee-jerk kind of way, that this could lead to a really bad result for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's I think we've got like the next few weeks to see how all that unfolds. And the more time that kind of is in between right now and like whatever the next steps are, the better in my view.
Yeah, like there's that old quote that, like that goes way back to ancient times, where it's like the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, right? Like that old cliche. But I think that if you live under the strain of conflict, that quote hits home to you in a very real way. So even though, we can sit here in the West in other parts that are relatively free from conflict, and we can kind of look at the ethics of a situation and the kind of what you should be doing on a, moral level, when you are not safe, like you said, that's always in the back of the mind. Like you want to be the strong, right? You do not want to be the weak and then just be at the mercy of the other entity with the bigger stick. And so subconsciously, the more your threat level is, like the more you will support policies that ensure that you preference being strong and powerful and aggressive, and you probably think of those other second order ethical moral issues later. And look, again, impossible to really understand because we're not in that situation, but that's where my mind goes to. So Andy, with everything that's happened in the last week, where does that leave your thoughts on like how we should be thinking about this?
I'm trying to like look at this as dispassionately as I can, right? As I think we should just generally try and do. And I think in kind of looking at it dispassionately, I'm trying not to get caught too much up in the emotive side of it. It's hard not to when you hear the stories, but like I don't want it to become like almost like the pornographic element of it, right? Where it becomes a bit kind of like I don't indulge in it. You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay, this terrible thing happened. Let's park that, accept that happened, but then keep it very much like, yes, but what should happen next? Or if we're thinking calmly and coolly and rationally, like how should we treat all of these other questions? So, for example, Palestinian protesters, right? And just because you might, and sort of accept, like maybe find a space for a few different elements of this issue to kind of have their home. So, and that includes acknowledging that you can sort of accommodate peaceful protest of Palestinian people without that compromising your sentiments towards, Jewish Australians, for example, or acknowledging that actually no, there were atrocities that happened and we would classify them as war crimes. So you can kind of have those views without, necessarily, just being really black and white about stuff. So it's devastating what happened. There's no two words, but I just hope we don't see a miscalculation in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, me too. Look, I think, I agree with what you're saying. I just have less faith in the public's ability to be dispassionate about it. And
no, I don't have any faith in anyone to be dispassionate.
And it just gets to probably, like I mentioned the word blood feud before, right? And I feel it's like that actually peace is such an improbability because of that blood. Too many sons and daughters have died, kind of thing on both sides. It doesn't take much for you to empathize that if that were to happen to you, how you just might not be able to come back from that. So I do really agree with you that I think that we might see some miscalculations and bad policies coming up. For me, it's just kind of reinforced how helpless we are when the tides of war come, like in some ways, right? Like this atrocity has occurred, but many more are to come, right? And rationally, is there something that could happen to stop that? Yes, but it won't happen because of all these other things, right? And just that hopelessness of it all, right? That you feel like, and this is where that kind of pacifism kind of breaks down, right? That the world doesn't work like that in terms of, action and reaction. In terms of the protests and closer to home and finding a place for all these different voices, that part too is challenging, right? Like I'm a big believer in allowing a space for protest, but I do see how incredibly destructive it is to make things about race and having anti-Semitic language being used, given everything that group of people have gone through. I'm agreeing. There's absolutely no space for that. In our society here in Australia, and I think everyone would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, on a lighter note, no pun intended. How have you been going with your weight loss journey over the past week? Last week's episode, we revealed our desire to shed some kilos. How are you going with that?
So I haven't seen much progress, I must admit, but I have made a few lifestyle changes. So I have started to track my food, and it's just a process that I've done many times before. I hate it, but I love it because I know that it works. And I have kind of prioritized a little bit more kind of movement in my day. And like I said, not to burn calories, but to get myself in the right mindset that this is part of the change that needs to happen, right? So yeah, and the other thing that I have done is I have started the awful process of contacting a few gyms in my area, some 24-hour gyms, and that is real dedication because having to deal with those fuckers is shows real dedication. They just freaking hound you and they won't, I don't know who does the sales training for all these organizations and gyms, but they're all the same and it's just horrible tactics. But anyway, how are you going? How's the fasting going?
So last episode I mentioned I was doing the OMAD diet, which stands for 1 meal a day. And I got to say, like, I'm really enjoying it. So, and I think the thing I enjoy about it is that I'm past the point of feeling any kind of like physical effects of like hunger or, hangry sort of moments or, I don't necessarily feel hungry. I can sort of acknowledge that I've got like, that I'm hungry as in like I've got an empty stomach, but it's not like that kind of level of hunger that's just like really driving you nuts that you're not eating. And equally, I don't have any of those like, parts of my brain that's like, you need to think, why are you not eating something? Or like you're at your desk, like it's lunchtime, like you got to go and get something to eat. Or how about like go for a walk and get like a snack, So
Have you found it impacting any of your social activities?
Well, actually, no, because I still get my 1 meal a day. So a practical example was where when I went to lunch last weekend, like for a proper lunch out, it just was that my lunch was my 1 meal a day, right? Instead of usually it's dinner. So I actually can make it quite flexible, but then also the meal that I do have can be a good meal. It doesn't have to be like fucking lentils on crisp bread or something, right? It can be a proper meal. And that's, I'm also enjoying that. And the other thing I'm enjoying, even just as like a matter of practical convenience, is that like I don't have to pack a lunch for work. I don't have to go out at lunchtime and think what I'm going to buy and then all these shitty options at the food court. Like I can just, I just don't eat, and I get time and I can go for a walk and just do whatever, like instead, like it's sort of almost liberating. So anyway, so I'm enjoying the actual diet, and I think like
you feel like you've rewired your brain now.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I've gotten into some sort of habits of like drinking a lot more water. I'm having like a multivitamin just to make sure I'm getting everything, like just incorporating all that extra stuff. But and like to the question of results, right? Like, so I've been doing this now for like just shy of, I think, at least 3 weeks, or around 3 weeks or more. I've actually lost count, but so it's enough time to have started to see some results. So I wasn't tracking my weight by like an app before, just literally like a few days ago. So the first reading I had was on the 5th of October. So we're recording this on the 12th of October. And since that time, I've lost 2 kilos. So that's 2 kilos in the space of less than a week. So, in fact, exactly a week. However, 2 kilos sounds like, that's like rapid weight loss, right?
Congratulations.
But, however, I say that with the caveat that at least 1 kilo of those 2 occurred between overnight when my wife moved the scales to a different position on the floor.
Calibration incident.
So I think the genuine weight loss in that period is around 1 kilo, but that's kind of what I wanted it to be. So 1 kilo a week. So to me, that's like a good feedback loop that it's working and that I'm getting a result. So I'm quite happy with that. And then I made a kebab my 1 meal a day. So so we'll see how we go. Although I only ate half of it.
Well, it's all swings and roundabouts. But no, let's. I'm excited for you because I think that these like little health changes makes things interesting as well. Like even if it is diet related, just enough to kind of make you feel like you're doing something different, which I think is half the battle. I'm still in that hard bit where, even though I'm making changes and I feel like I'm doing something, I'm not getting any results yet. And I just got to stay true to it for the next few weeks, right? Yeah, and like obviously you always mess up with your diet. It's just maybe I have many more opportunities to mess up than you do at 1 meal a day. Yeah, I like it, and who knows, if I don't get results, maybe I'll switch to some of your methods. I'll start to get desperate and borrow yours.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, we'll see how we go. We'll weigh next week then.
It is very discouraging realizing how inaccurate bathroom scales are. Like when you move, especially the electronic ones. Because I have the same thing where I used to have one, and it was a Bluetooth one that was synced to my phone. I really loved it. It was 2 decimal places and gave this illusion of like precision. And at the time when I was doing it years ago, we had a cleaner, and they would always move the scale when they cleaned it, and it would always fuck with the calibration because it was accurate, and because you're only looking at differences really. So if it's off, it doesn't matter, right? Because you're looking at the change. But as soon as you move it, that's when things get reset, which is annoying. It's like the digital scales, they're not as accurate as you think. So for all those, don't get disheartened.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, over and out.